What's up, everyone? Welcome to this episode of the podcast. Really excited about this episode, to be honest with you. I hadn't talked to Bryan before from Day 6 Arrows. I knew about his products and had tested them with the Bro Crew, but Bryan and I had a chance to talk and sit down about arrows and a lot of the cool topics floating around with arrows components and momentum versus KE, FOCs. And I had no idea going into this episode, but I think I told him in the episode, I'm like, man, you and I are like brain twins. So we had a lot of common philosophies and a lot of common beliefs when it comes to building an arrow and what guys should be looking for in their setup. And it was really refreshing to see a heavy arrow guy have his mindset. And just really appreciated him giving me all of his feedback and all of his answers and stuff. And I learned a lot from the guy who has a lot more experience putting animals on the ground than I do with a bow, whether it be trad or compound. And there's a valuable opinion here when it comes to Bryan, and really look forward to doing future podcasts with him as well. And again, he's from Day 6 Arrows, which is a higher quality arrow, and I'll be testing those out later this year along with some other cool stuff that he has coming around the bend. So hopefully you guys really enjoy this episode. I know that I had a blast recording this. There's some kind of drier content in here just because I wanted to learn some stuff about arrow manufacturing from kind of a nerdy, geeky standpoint. But for guys that are really trying to figure out what's the best arrow for them as far as a setup-wise for weight, FOCs, all this stuff, you're going to get a lot of really good information. And, I couldn't agree more with Bryan on pretty much every point he made. It was just a great podcast in general. So without any further ado, Bryan Broderick from Day 6 Arrows. Because when I messaged you originally about the arrow equation, and I'm like, I've been having that in my head for about a month now. I'm like, because some of these guys are just, well, you get these guys that have this thing, and then they just go all in and screw, moderation. I'm going to go 800,000 grain arrow, or I'm going to go
right.
And so that kind of was like, man, I'm just listening, especially with trad guys even more but understandably. It just seems like guys always take things to the max and then go over it. And so this having somebody that creates a heavy arrow on here, I thought would be a great idea. And I've been wanting to talk to you since I was testing your arrows with the Born and Raised guys, just looking at the design of the arrow. I really liked them.
Right.
So
yeah, those goofballs didn't tell me they were doing that.
Oh,
yeah. And I said, hey, if you're going to put me heads up against a guy with a stainless collar, let me send a stainless collar. Don't send me to a gunfight with a knife,
Yeah. Yep.
And they're like, oh, does it make a difference? Those are probably some of the best elk killers in the world right there. But technical guys, they are not.
Well, Cody, with the bow aspect of it, he likes to keep it under the rug, but he knows his way around a bow pretty darn well.
Yeah. Now I will say Cody does know his stuff.
Yeah,
sure,
but Trent is, which side's the pointy end? All right, here we go.
Well, what's funny is I sent 4 dozen arrows up originally for those guys, and the Trent and Trevor are pretty close to the same. Steve's definitely a distinct difference, and so is Cody with his albatross arms. So, and somehow or another, Cody is the only one that got the right arrows out of the 4, and the other 3 had all their arrows mixed up. And I was just like, good gravy. They start calling, goes, man, I don't think this is right. I'm like, no, it's not right. Steve is like a 400 spine, 26-inch draw, and you're supposed to be a 329. How did you end up with his arrows?
Right.
And they said, man, just help us out and send us a list.
Right. Well,
let's pretend,
Let's get an intro for you here. So for the guys listening, I'm sitting down with Bryan, and why don't you give him a little rundown of who you are, Bryan, and what you do?
Oh, yeah, no problem. Born and raised in the South in Alabama, been a bow hunter for a long time, and started Day 6 gear this past summer. Basically ended up in the arrow business by default. Was going to help my buddy kind of improve upon Zelor. He owned that company over in Australia, and we were going to work together and improve on that product and then bring it into the States at a higher level. And about midway through that, he got me really passionate and spun up about it. I'd been shooting those arrows for years, and then he decided to go a different direction. And so that's how Day 6 was born. I thought, well, I don't want to start this company as Zelor Arrows again, because I want to have a company that I can build all kinds of really neat products, so that's why I kind of rebranded it as Day 6 and called it Day 6 Gear. Because I felt like if I was going to go and do this, I want to build a lot of cool stuff that I've been wanting for years. And I don't want to limit myself to just arrows. So that's why we did what we did. And so,
what's the deal with Day 6?
Well, Day 6 is the 6th day of creation.
Okay.
It's the day that the animals were created and man to rule over them. So I just thought it was kind of a neat, a neat name. And of course, everybody thinks it means Saturday, so you can go with that either.
Yeah. Well, like I said, man, when I finally got my hand on your arrow, that day was the first day I think I had heard of them, and Cody. Cody knows his stuff, and when he was like, tell me about this arrow, I was like, all right. So that immediately put it on my radar, and then when I saw the component system that you had put together, I saw how thick the walls were. I'm like, man, these are going to be a freaking tough arrow. And it was just the weight, the micro. I'm like, if I was going to design an arrow, it would be pretty freaking similar to that. And I just really caught my eye, and I really liked them. And those guys aren't going to use something if it doesn't work. I mean, they're just killers. So
no, and I, you know what, this is the honest truth. I found these arrows in Australia, I guess about 3 years ago, and I had always wanted that arrow. And so when I found the Zelors over there, I thought, oh my gosh, this is like 80% there. But I didn't like the component system. They were just way too big and just not what I was looking for. And so I was kind of cobbling up those shafts with some aftermarket, components. And I thought, man, there's nowhere you can get this product put together in one place. This really needs to happen. And so, I'm like you. When I first got my hands on them, I thought, this is exactly what I want. I just want to tweak it here, here, and here. And so when Cody was down deer hunting with me last year in Alabama, I was shooting them then, and he kept picking them up, playing with them, looking at them, and he's really onto something here. This is incredible. So I just got real fortunate having friends like those guys and having friends like Aaron Snyder and some other guys that really wanted the same thing I did and were willing to throw in with me and help, get it out there for people to see. Because honestly, Garrett, I mean, if I would have started this down here in Greenbow, Alabama, and started showing the people I know, nobody would know who the hell we were. So you just got to get lucky every now and then and have some good friends that'll help you,
Well, your startup kind of reminded me of the way Iron Will started out, and I loved his business plan and I don't mean to take away from anything. It was like get that shit in some really well-known people's hands and let them use it. He got his in Cameron Haynes, Joe Rogan, Aaron Snyder. He just send them to the right people, and your plan was like, man, he's sending them to the right people.
Well, the thing is that you figure my two friends that were quote unquote in the industry are Cody and Aaron.
Good friends to have.
Well, and it didn't have anything to do with business. It was just these happened to be two of my friends through hunting, and they wanted the same product and they liked it. And my gosh, I mean, how could you pick two better people to start, shooting
Right.
your product. I mean, it just look, it is luck and it is a blessing,
Right.
just to have those kind of guys in my life. And so, and then the product has kind of held its own once people got their hands on it,
For sure. Well, I want to get into some of the things here because you're the first person. I do have a contact at Easton Archery that I ask a few questions, but you're the first person that has really probably has the knowledge of how an arrow is made from start to finish and materials used and stuff like that. And so I'm curious because Gold Tip really touts, the way that they make their arrows and all this stuff. And then Easton has their way of, we use this carbon. Tell me about the materials used and kind of why that's important to use certain types of carbon, but that's probably not the right word, but
no, there it is. I'll give you some bird's eye view looks into like how a carbon arrow is made, the different types of material and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to get into the weeds exactly how we do ours, only because it is slightly different, and I kind of want to keep it that way for as long as I can. So,
yeah, no, I totally get that.
Yeah. And let me say this too, that there's pros and cons with everything, and as deep in the weeds as you want me to get, I'll tell you. But so with regards to the different types of carbon, you have woven carbon, which is going to be strands that are oriented in different directions or woven together like a fabric. And then you have what's called unidirectional carbon, which is, as the name says, is carbon that is all going one direction. And so a lot of times what you'll see is the woven carbon or the woven fabric, you'll see basically on the outside laminate, and it's basically, a lot of times it's more cosmetic than anything. I will say that there are definitely some benefits to having a mixture of the two, just for being able to orient strengths or orient the fibers to provide stiffness in certain directions.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. The next thing you have is the different classes or grades of carbon. Is this the stuff you want me to answer?
Yeah, I just was curious, because you have, the axis infused and stuff like that. And I'm just I've always struggled of like, well, how do we know what are some of the better carbons out there versus, and you're going where I want you to. So keep going. Keep going.
All right. I don't want your eyes to glaze over.
No,
I want to talk about.
I love getting into this kind of stuff. So
okay. All right. Yeah, no. Okay. So then you have like the different, and keep in mind, I have a limited background in composites, but I do have a background in composites as it pertains to some other businesses before I got into the aero industry. So I knew enough to be dangerous, but I did know enough so people couldn't bullshit me. So anyway, so you have your different grades of carbon. And so that would be the different modulus. So you have like high modulus, medium modulus, low modulus, that kind of thing. Okay. And basically what that is, it's the quality of the carbon. Okay. So for example, like a high modulus carbon, the individual strand is very strong. So you don't have to use as much material to achieve the same stiffness or strength. So, and that's what a lot of your high-end arrows are made from, is high modulus carbon. And that is why they're expensive, because the high modulus carbon raw materials is double the cost of just standard modulus. Okay. So anyway, the benefit of a high modulus carbon is the strength, the strength of each individual fiber. You don't have to use as much material. Therefore, you can build a light arrow. Well, we didn't want to build a light arrow. So, it really wasn't necessary for us to use a 100% high modulus carbon matrix, if you will. When you say matrix, that's the blend of the epoxy and carbon and all that stuff.
So when we say high modulus, I'm guessing that would be like a Gold Tip Pro Hunter?
Man, I don't know.
Because it's super light, super strong. That's just why I was asking.
Probably so. But believe it or not, I have spent as little time as possible digging into how the other arrows are made, because I was so focused on how I wanted this made, and it was so different than the standard stuff that it was hard to get even some of the factories to talk to me, because they would all say, oh, well, it's going to be too heavy that way. Well, no, that's what I want. So anyway, it was very difficult to do that. But yes, it probably is. Most of your high-end arrows are made with high modulus carbon or graphite, if you will, and you don't have to use as much material to get a super stiff arrow and not have a lot of weight.
Okay.
So anyway, where I was headed with this as far as what arrow I was trying to build. I needed more material. So, the only thing you can do is go to a lower modulus material where you have to use more, or you can change the way you orient the strands. And so we did a combination of those two things, to try to get this arrow where we wanted it as far as like grains per inch and all that. The Z-Lore arrow was already there for the most part, but it didn't have like the tolerances and all that we were looking for, as far as the consistency of the outside diameter, and with regards to like the spine consistency. Now, the straightness was always pretty good, but those other two things, there were variables there because of how they were being made. And with arrows that take an outsert component, if you have inconsistencies in the outside diameter, because the inside diameter of an arrow is always going to be the same. So, a 165 ID arrow is always going to be 165 because it's wrapped around a mandrel that's 165.
And so ID is internal diameter, just so folks.
Inside diameter.
Yeah. So I just making sure people understood exactly what you were saying there.
Yeah. So that's always going to be the same, So if you can imagine a toilet paper roll, you may wrap the same amount of squares around a toilet paper roll. The little cardboard centerpiece thing is always going to be the same, and the outside diameter of that toilet paper roll, they all may be a little bit different. Well, it's the same thing building an arrow. So if you have inconsistencies in the outside diameter, and you've also got a machined metal component that's supposed to slide over the outside, well, you can't really build those two to tight tolerances if the outside diameter of the arrow is fluctuating up and down the shaft. So if it's 255 at the cut end, and then it's a 32-inch shaft, it's 255, and then you come back 4 inches to make a 28-inch arrow, and you cut it, and it's 252. Well, then you're going to have, and say that you've built your outsert to 256, so you'll have 1/1000th of room to be able to get it on there and have a glue bond. Well, now you go to having, making me do math here, but you know what I'm saying? 4/1000th of a delta between the two instead of one, and now you have wobble on the component.
More room for error, basically, is what you're saying.
Yeah. And then the opposite of that is that if you're building 252 arrows and you have an outsert that's 253, and then when you cut it, it ends up being 255 or 256, then you have to sand the crap out of the arrow to get the outsert on. So that's really where I was trying to focus, what I wanted as far as the tolerances from the factory, was just try to get that more consistent. And what could I do as far as my spec requirements to try to get that as close as possible? And it's an ongoing battle, I assure you.
Well, I'm kind of curious of why, and this is just from my understanding, being from Alabama, most guys are after those higher KE arrows. They're not really worried about momentum. They want to shoot faster. So where did this whole momentum thing? I know you said you're building them for a friend. Where did this whole momentum mindset come from? Being in an area where it's mostly whitetails, because it seems like most guys are after the light arrows over there.
Well, they are, and to put it in perspective, if well, I'm not going to get into what we've sold, but we've sold 3 orders in Alabama.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah. So, but you know, when I wanted this arrow for myself, it was because I've always been a heavy arrow guy. And the reason is that I started working in an archery shop in 1989 or 90. So, I'm a little longer in the tooth than some of these guys. And so we started back in the old days when the bows were crap. You know, when an Oneida Screaming Eagle was like at the top of the class, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That was like groundbreaking back then. I can very honestly and proudly say I never did shoot one of those POSs though. But back then, you know, we're shooting heavy arrows, standard aluminum inserts, Thunderhead 125s. I can proudly say I never shot Muzzies either. But you know, Rocky Mountain Razorheads, wasps, you know, the old, and then of course we had the old 2-blade Bear Super Razorheads, the Swickies, you know, all that stuff back then. Well, we're shooting bows back in those days and tuning and building bows for, you know, people, and we're shooting a slow, heavy bow that is blowing through everything we shoot. And so I went on my first elk hunt at, oh gosh, I guess it was in 91 or 92 out in New Mexico. And I didn't kill a bull that year. But I had a lot of encounters and all, and I went back the next year and I killed a bull. And I had killed a bull with more of a whitetail setup, like an aluminum 2213, and a Thunderhead 125. And I killed the bull, but it was pure luck. I shot the bull at 45 yards. Thought he was a lot closer. The arrow dropped. It hit him right in the heart. I got 7-8 inches of penetration and just happened to go right in his heart.
Oh, man.
And the bull that took 2 steps fell over. But I realized then that wasn't going to work for elk. So I came back, started setting up heavier bows, 2219s, the heavier arrows, heavier broadheads, and started having a lot more success with elk, moose, bear, stuff like that. And believe it or not, I was taking all these trips and doing all this stuff back then. I don't know how I got to that point, but no one else was really doing it from where we're from in Alabama. But I was pretty much spending, by the time I was 21, 22 years old, I was spending the entire month of September living in my truck with a camper shell in a western state. I'd started Idaho, then moved down to, you know, around Meeker, around Colorado, hunting there, and then moved down to New Mexico. I would do that every year. Or either I'd go, you know, moose hunting or caribou or whatever. I just basically took everything I made and spent it on hunting and lived like a hobo, you know? So, because all I want to do is hunt.
Right.
But once we went to those heavy setups, I understood what a heavy arrow did. And then for some reason, we all went through this mental lapse and thought that these new bows we have to shoot lightning fast, light arrows. Now keep in mind, lightning fast back then was 260 with like a 7 grain per pound arrow.
Jeez.
You know, but if you hit the 260 mark back then with a 300 grain arrow, I mean, you were
overdraw.
You know? Oh yeah. Yeah. Overdraw, 24-inch arrow, you know, 85 grain broadhead, you know. And somehow I went through that phase. It didn't last very long because there was so much failure associated with that. That when I finally hung the compound up back then, and that would have been in 95, 96, when we were going through our speed phase, I ran into a guy that was building custom bows, and he and I built my first recurve together. And I went into the trad world and stayed there for 20 years. and understanding what a heavy arrow moving slow but flying properly with a cut on contact head will do out of a trad bow, it's a no-brainer when you move to a compound. So I guess that is a 30-minute long answer on how I got started on heavy arrows from Alabama.
No problem.
It was from failures with light arrows.
Yeah, that's the stuff that I'm looking for, and I kind of want to get into your process here, and I've got so many questions in my head that probably more than what you want to get into.
No, it's okay,
but
man. It's okay.
I really geek out on arrows. That's kind of probably my favorite part of archery is the arrow and the broadhead aspect. So for some manufacturers out there, let's get into the manufacturing as far as coming out with your specs. Some guys will take a 31-inch arrow and then measure the straightness.
Yeah.
And that, what is your process? Because I feel like some arrow manufacturers maybe kind of cheat that process to get the best straightness they can, while some are measuring a longer arrow, so they're getting more defect, even though they're probably actually a straighter arrow.
Well, that is a very loaded question as far as like speculating on what some of the other arrow manufacturers do. But I'll tell you this, the only way to truly test the straightness of an arrow is basically down its axis with a laser. And that's the only true way to get a true average of what it is, because I think the industry spec is plus or minus whatever you're calling it within 28 inches. Okay, so if you've got a 32-inch shaft, you're basically measuring 28 inches of that shaft to see if it's plus or minus 1,000, plus or minus 3.
Okay.
So let's say with our arrows that we are selling as plus or minus 1,000, I'll have one section on that 28-inch range of that arrow that may go plus or minus 2,000. Okay. And then I may move 6 inches down, and it may be plus or minus 250,000. Like it won't even move the needle. And then so on and so forth. And you move down, and then you take that average. And that's kind of how people are checking them to say that's what they are. The way we do it is the spec we do it with two specs. We have, and this is done at the factory, but we also check them ourselves when we're building them up. So, and let me just say this before I get into all this. Do we send arrows out from time to time that are not plus or minus 1,000? Absolutely we do. Do we mean to? No. But we 100% do. Any arrow manufacturer that tells you they don't, well, I'll just say that we do. So I don't ever want to disparage anybody else. So, but I know that we do. And here's why. When that arrow leaves that factory, it could very well be plus or minus 1,000. So, but keep in mind that the curing process and epoxy and the way you're building these things, it may be cured enough to shoot and do all these different things in 24, 48 hours. But that curing process is just like concrete or anything else. It continues to cure over long periods of time. I mean, I think they said that concrete takes like 20-something years to actually fully finish curing. And all of this stuff continues to happen. So let's say that we build all, we have all our arrows built, they're packaged, and they're crated up and shipped to us. Well, what if on the way over, some guy making, $9 an hour, takes another pallet, pushes it over against ours, and wedges our boxes over at an angle for 3 days. So those kind of things can happen. So just because they leave the factory at 1,000 doesn't mean that they may stay that way throughout their life. The other thing is how they're stored. If you store them leaning at an angle or whatever, different things can happen. It's life. It's the real world. Don't make excuses and bullshit about it. Just tell the truth. So the way we have ours tested at the factory is they shoot a laser down the length of them, and that's the only way to get it. and then they have one that they test for the concentricity, and then also the outside diameter spec that we're, and it's basically on a sled, and the laser looks like basically it's like shooting straight down like a chop saw. And you basically slide that sled up and down, and it'll give you your average as the arrow is spinning in that sled.
Okay.
And it also will, measure and gauge like the thickness to make sure that our outside diameter thickness spec is met. So all of these things are done, and we actually will test them all the way out to within 2 inches of the ends of both arrows, which most people don't do that. But we go out that far, and because we want to make sure that when they leave the factory, they're as close as they're going to get. Okay. And then when we get them and we're building them up, we're spin testing them and checking them on a RAM. You know what I'm talking about, the RAM arrow tester?
The spine tester where you spin it and it has that gauge.
Yeah, but you also can check the straightness and the concentricity of them with that same machine.
Okay.
So it does all kinds of. It's a great machine. So anyway, we check them with those to make sure that they're, still within spec. But every now and then we have a few that slip by. They may go out at a 3,000th average. Not what we want, but it certainly can happen. And anybody that's bought arrows over the years knows that you're going to get 12, and 8 of them are perfect, 4 of them are okay. And we try to make it to where as many of those are as perfect as possible within our control. I will tell you this, there's not many humans alive that could tell the difference in a 3,000 straightness arrow and a 1,000 straightness arrow.
I'm glad you brought that up.
These are just not there.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that actually leads me into my second question, because something that just from shooting a lot and affording what I could afford when I started out versus what I can afford now today, shooting like a 6,000th arrow, like an old Beeman, going from that to even a 3,000th or a 1,000th. It took a big difference for me just to notice. But I personally, and this is something, and talking to a guy that's in the industry would be great to hear your feedback on this opinion. I've had the opinion for many years that I really don't care about the straightness to a certain point. I mean, 6,000ths is still plenty accurate. I'm more worried about spine consistency. And for me, that through the years, it just seems like I'm not going to outshoot a .003 to a .001. I'm not that good. It's just, I can't do that. I think my groups did tighten up between a .006 and a .003. But good luck proving it, What's your opinion on that? Because I've just always preached, spine consistency over straightness.
You answered the question. I don't need to answer it. You answered it. The difference is spine consistency is what's paramount. That is key. I'll tell you this. I could take a 0.009 arrow that has perfect spine consistency, and it will outshoot a 1,000 straightness arrow that doesn't have good spine consistency. That is it in a nutshell. And you can, I've sat at a dinner table with what I consider one of the best archers in the world, and he has said the exact same thing that you said.
Okay.
And I'll tell you another thing that I'm not going to say who it is, but he's one of the best in the world. He also said that there are only a handful of people out there that could notice the difference in 5 to 6 grains per arrow difference, much less 10 grains per arrow difference. And he said that he didn't even obsess over getting them closer than 5 grains. So, most of our guys that buy our arrows, I mean, they're matching them within 1 or 2 grains of each other total build.
Same here.
Yeah. And he just said, look, doesn't matter. So, but the spine consistency, that is it. That is it in a nutshell. How it's reacting to that constant pressure from that bow it's going to be repetitive coming out of that bow. If from arrow to arrow, how it's receiving that energy varies, that's where you're going to get your erratic flight. I would shoot a 6,000 straightness arrow all day long, never bat an eye, as long as it was high quality and consistent spine.
Right.
That's it. That is it in a nutshell. So you're tracking right as far as what I believe in.
Well, that's just from my experience, and I'm always hesitant to put those out there. It's like, man, because I'm like, good luck proving that, one way or another. I hate making statements that you can't really definitively prove, because it is really, I mean, like you said, it's super hard to outshoot a straightness. I mean, it is. I mean, my group's at 60 yards. I mean, you were taking a measuring tape between the 6,000ths and the 3,000ths. I mean, it was like, and you had to be shooting great, like extremely well, to be able to tell the difference with those. And it was like, man, like just thousands of arrows. I'm like, I just convinced myself. And so you validating that, I feel like I can actually go out there and say more confidently now, for sure, that there's other guys, especially at that world class archer that you mentioned there, that makes me feel good about my opinion.
Yeah, well, when this guy, and the reason I'm not mentioning his name is he gets paid a lot of money from a big arrow company, I'm sure.
I'm sure I can figure it out.
Yeah, but one of the most honest people I've ever met, and not trying to sell anything. He just said, look, 5 to 10 grains doesn't matter, not a big deal. Plus or minus 3,000, 6,000 straightness, doesn't matter. If the spine's not consistent, you got a problem. And that was it. I mean, that's it in a nutshell. So
for sure,
and even knowing all of that, I still obsess over my arrows and match them to within 1 grain.
Same here.
I cannot help it.
I was going to say all of mine.
The process, probably.
I think that's what it is too. It's almost like a therapy, and I'm the same way. If they're not within a grain, they're a field tip arrow. They're a 3D shooting arrow, and that's what they are.
Yep.
But I will give this to having maybe a lower grade arrow, is that my refining process for actually building a batch of arrows, and I've got friends that have probably a little bit better process because they get, like you hit the nail on the head, 4 out of 12 arrows out of a dozen. You're going to have to tweak some of those arrows to get them to shoot a broadhead, it seems like, out of that 12. That's right. Yep. And I've gotten mine down to where it's like 10 or 11 are good, and with my process. And then I have a buddy that's like, dude, I don't have any problems with it, but he goes even farther than I do. So having a lower grade arrow kind of forces you to really increase your process and be more efficient and more accurate and more detail oriented to get those suckers to fly. I mean, so my process, I do the bare shaft tuning. I do all that stuff. Certain arrows we cut off both ends instead of just cutting off a one. I guess my next question would be is, because you're a heavy arrow guy, I'd be really curious at hearing what your actual arrow setup is.
Oh yeah, no problem. So, which of the 40 bows are you want me to say?
Well, let's go elk.
I'm just kidding. I've had a traditional bow sickness for about 22, 23 years, and I finally broke down and designed my own because I never could. Well, I think I pissed off every bowyer in the country trying to get them to build what I wanted, trying to tell them how to build their bow my way.
Yeah. And
I finally convinced a good friend of mine who's an incredible bowyer to do it for me. So I think my bow buying craze is probably over. I think I finally built my unicorns and I'm happy.
Right on.
But with regards to a compound bow, I'll tell you exactly how I like to set one up. Okay. So what is IBO measured at? 30 inches? Isn't that right?
Yeah. 7 grains per pound. So 350, 30 inches.
Yeah. 30 inches, right?
Yep.
Yep. And at what way? At what weight is IBO?
Well, that's a really good question. It should be 70 pounds, but to go on a little bit of a tangent here, if you don't mind, I was actually researching that the other day because these obsession bows are totally missing IBO when guys are some of the obsession bows.
Yeah.
And we're talking 15, 20 feet per second slow. And I'm like, what the heck is going on here? So I started looking at what IBO is, and it's 30 inches, 30-inch draw length, 70 pounds, 350 grain IBO or 350 grain arrow. And I'm like, okay. And then now there's some articles that say, well, it's IBO is 7 grains per inch or 7 grains per pound. I'm like, okay. It doesn't say anything about.
That can't be right, because you can't advertise an IBO speed unless there's a set weight.
That's what I was thinking, and that's why you have like Hoyt using the ATA, which has a set weight at 70. And so I'm thinking maybe Obsession is trying to measure these bows at 80 pounds.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll tell you this, that I'm dating myself, of course, but I told you that I was working in an archery shop, running an archery shop in either 89 or 90. I can't remember what year it was. I was still in high school. I was fixing to graduate high school. And so, but I want to say, and I'm probably going to get just hammered for being wrong, but let me just preface this with, I can't remember what I had for breakfast this morning. So don't hold me to remember what happened 30 years ago. But I want to say that IBO was measured back then at 60 pounds, but it was 30 inches though.
Okay.
And so, and I may be wrong, but I want to say that back then it was 30 inches at 60, and I knew that they had raised it to 70, but I didn't know that if it was 70 pounds across the board or it was just the 7 grains per pound. That's why I was asking. I figured you would know.
Yeah. Yeah. And
we figure IBO when we're setting our charts up. We're figuring IBO at 70 pounds, 30 inches, and then the IBO rating of 7 grains per pound. But that's not the way we're building arrows. We're building our chart based on what our arrows are and how they spine at those weights. So, so let me back up. You asked me about an arrow setup. This is my philosophy on it. Okay. My philosophy is that at 8 grains per pound, a compound bow is the most efficient based on my testing. Okay. So if I'm trying to word this right so people don't get confused. So let's say it's like a gear in your car or a prop on a boat. The horsepower is not going to change. It's the same what the engines will generate, but you can change that gear and find that sweet spot to where it utilizes that horsepower the most efficient. Where that car will use the horsepower the most efficient and perform the best. The way the boat will perform the best and maximize that horsepower. A bow, a gun, all of that is the same way. You're looking for that sweet spot, that perfect mix of energy and weight, to basically get as much of the energy out of the bow into the arrow without overloading the arrow. Okay. So what I found is that 8 grains per pound is kind of that perfect sweet spot for a bow. Some bows are a little different, but I'm talking about minute differences now with all these modern bows. So to that end, let's say that you're shooting a 70-pound bow, and you're shooting a 28-inch draw. Okay. My philosophy there is that a 70-pound bow on a 28-inch draw is not the same bow as a 70-pound bow with a 30-inch draw. Would you not agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Huge difference in performance.
Yes.
Right? So what I say is I say, okay, there's a big difference in performance. So you can't really use that same 8 grains per pound for across the board. So what I say is okay, well, the 28-inch draw is kind of the average, which is, to me, what they should measure performance on the bows is 28, not 30, because very few people have 30-inch draw lengths. So at 8 grains per pound, if you're drawing, 70 pounds, 28 inches, I think a 560 grain arrow is perfect. I think if you go up and you're shooting a 29-inch bow, a 570, 575 grain arrow is a little better. And then you go to 30, 585, 590. Okay. And then, the opposite of that, as you go down, a 27-inch draw, you would drop a little bit and you'd be more like a a 545, and then you drop down to, if you were a 26-inch draw, you'd be more in that 530, 35 range. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, yeah.
Because it's not the same bow across the board. A 70-pound bow is not a 70-pound bow from 26-inch draw to 30-inch draw. So anyway, that's where when I try to help guys build a perfect arrow, I'm going, okay, well, I shoot a 65-pound bow, and I have a 28-inch draw. So, my arrow is 520 grains, and I believe that's pretty close to being right at, or maybe 525, and I believe that's right at 8 grains per pound. I think you're making me do math here. So
let's see. You're doing 65
at 28. Yep. 20. In a high performance bow.
I suck at math too. I graduated in algebra too.
You're
right in there.
Yeah. 6 times 8 is 48. Then half 8 is 40. So that's 520, right?
Yeah.
Yep. So to me, I'm right in that wheelhouse to where I need to be. And so every time people call me, they're going, oh, I thought you wanted us to build a 600 grain arrow. And I'm like, no, that is not what I said. What I said is you want to make sure to have a heavy enough arrow that is making your bow the most efficient. It's utilizing the energy that's being generated, and that arrow is absorbing, that energy the most efficiently. So when you go to a lighter arrow, as your bow gets louder, it's telling you that you're putting tons of energy back in the limbs. It's vibrating. It's loud. That is energy going back into the bow, not into the arrow. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. Yes, it does.
And then, of course, you can go the opposite way too. You can go a little too heavy. Once you get too heavy, now you're basically crashing the limbs and the performance. Does that make sense?
Yep. And I totally agree with you. This is where I was going to head. So just keep going.
No, I'm done. That's it.
Well, you and I we started talking because I sent you a question about this equation I had stuck in my head, and it turns out you and I were on the same exact brain length wave, because I've got this website now, and I don't even know how I do it. I don't even know where to start, but I've got this desire to, and it sounds like you do as well, to get this archery calculator out there where you have a point of diminishing returns, because there's no calculators out there. They all just show your KE and your momentum. There's no, well, with this setup, this is your most efficient arrow up to this point. And I don't know how to make that happen, but I'm sure interested in seeing something put together like that, because it's to me, it would be really great to see, and I think we could up the bar having an app like that.
Well, I do too. The thing is that here's the problem with it, and there's so many variables. So, the variables that would have to be taken into consideration to do that is going to take a lot smarter person than I.
Me too.
But maybe somebody like you can do it. But again, there's never a one size fits all. And this is kind of a message I always try to get to my guys when I'm talking to them.
Mm-hmm.
Like they'll say, well, I'm setting up my wife's bow. It's, 48 pounds at 26 inches, based on your math, or say 50 pounds at 26 inches based on your math. She should be shooting a 300, and, if she was 28, she'd be 400. If she was 27, she'd be, say, 375. 26, maybe, 360. So based on your math, as you're raising, going up and down the draw length spectrum, with 8 grains per pound at 28 being that median, she should be shooting this. And I go, well, it's not a one size fits all. As you start diving down in weight, as you start diving down in performance with short draws, low weight,
mm-hmm.
you have to overcompensate for that with your weight to get your momentum formula up. Yep. You can't shoot the same formula for everybody. So I don't want to be misleading when I'm giving that formula. It's basically a 60 to 80 pound 28 to 31, 32 inch draw range. Does that make sense?
It does.
And as you're dipping lower in draw length and weight, you've got to start kind of do a custom formulation for what somebody needs. Because I would tell a guy that's setting his wife's bow up at 50 pounds at 26, hey man, she needs to shoot a 500 grain arrow. You're going to have to overcompensate for the low weight and the low performance based on a super short draw with weight. You basically have to start treating that compound like a trad bow.
I say the same exact thing. You and I are so similar on that, and I see it all the time. Guys are shooting 360. My hunting partner, I was with them when they killed a bull at 30 yards, and I think it was like a 360 to 380 grain arrow, something in there. I think 26 inch, 50 pound, just like you said. And I'm like, man, we need to get her at least over 4. But you're saying even closer to 5 would be better. And it just seems like when guys, or kids start getting into the sport, they want to go light to get that, to get that speed up there. And I understand trajectory's cool, it's great, but and you took the words right out of my mouth. You got to start treating these lower poundage, smaller jaw bows like a trad bow, because that's what you're doing. I mean, you're going to start shooting that 180 to 190 feet per second in there, and trad guys kill shit all the time. So, I mean, and plus, you're not going to be able to dial that far out there anyways with your sight. So, 40 yards is probably going to be your max with that bow from what I've seen, being able to adjust that far out there. It's going to take every pin that you got just to get out to 40 yards. So.
Oh, absolutely. Well, here's the thing. So you brought up a point, and I'll drill down on a little bit. I don't think that bows like that, short draw, low weight, youth, ladies, whatever, I just don't think that the same rules apply with regards to setting up the arrows and with regards to effective range. I have been fortunate to grow up in a very target-rich environment with lots of deer, lots of hogs, 4-month-long season. You could shoot 2 deer a day. Now you can shoot 1 a day. Well, actually, you can shoot a buck and a doe a day here until you get to your buck limit. And then hogs galore. So there would be years I would shoot 40 or 50 hogs with a trad bow. Okay. So growing up, having a lot of experience shooting a lot of different animals just because of my location, out of all of that, I've never, ever shot anything over 30 yards with my trad bow. So I look at a low poundage, low draw, low performance youth or whatever bow to be in that same category. And so as a result of that, when I was setting up bows for my kids and others, I never had more than 1 pin. And when I trained these kids to shoot, basically it was the pin was dead on at 15, and it was a little low at 20 and a little high at 10. And they basically had like a line of sight, like shooting a rifle. 1 pin that would fill that, be inside the vitals, inside that 20 and in range. And that's the way I set every one of these young people up. And they were so successful. And when I see these low pounded shooters, especially youth and ladies and all, and they have 4 or 5 pins just like their dad or their husband or whatever, they're never going to be successful on a consistent basis, because number one, you can't do the same thing that dad's doing. You're not going to be able to process the information that's coming in when it comes time to close a deal on an animal. So if you can teach these kids that, hey, here's your 20-yard ring. If he's inside the wire, you put the pin on him and you let him have it. That's how you teach how you teach young people, early young shooters, low pounded shooters. That's how you teach them to be successful taking game. And as you're, trying to make them shoot the same yardage as you are, and do the same calculations in the field, it's just failure after failure after failure. And here I am, 46 years old, and when I set up a compound, I still set it up with one pin, 0 at 25. I know the ballistics of the arrow, or I know the arch of the arrow, and I'm dead on at 25. I know how low to hold at 10 straight under the tree and how high to hold at 30, 35 at the most, and that's my max range. And I mean, you know, I've taken a lot of animals with both trad and compound, but I've limited my range. Now, I'm not a Western guy, but I have done a lot of Western hunting. And it's still an effective process, but now you're basically just stretching it to that 40-50 range, but you're doing it with limited, you're doing it with limited interference for your brain. And if you, that's the key to being a guy that capitalizes on every opportunity to take an animal, is limiting the chance that your brain is going to screw you over. Because that's what happens 9 times out of 10 is your brain gets in the way. Right.
No, I totally agree with that. And I'm just glad to hear you hammer that home, because it's nice to see guys that have that mindset. And you, from your experience, it just totally makes sense, man. I mean, I just wish I could carry you around in my pocket and tell everybody, because I preach on this stuff, but having somebody else that takes it even a little bit further, it's refreshing. It really is. And having a guy that is a heavy arrow guy also say, hey, there's a point of diminishing returns here, you know, that's also really refreshing as well to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be a 600 grain arrow. But is there a place for a 600 grain arrow? Oh, heck, you better believe it. I mean, you take a guy that shoots, 75 pounds and has a 28, 29, 30-inch draw. Man, I wish I could shoot 75 pounds and had a 29 or 30-inch draw.
Yep.
Because I'd be shooting a 600 grain arrow. I'd have a super efficient killing machine.
Yep. My buddy, we did a video the other day. It was just an Instagram video. I forget how fast he was shooting. I want to say it was like upper 270s or lower 280s. It was a 620 or 610 grain arrow.
Yeah.
And it was just like, oh my gosh, you could kill anything on the earth with that thing.
Oh, I mean, that's a laser beam. That's shooting a cannon.
Yeah.
A cannonball. So, I mean, and here's the thing. This is what, when you talk about diminishing return, there also is a point of diminishing return with regards to shed velocity. So people say, man, I don't want to shoot that heavy of an arrow. I'm going to lose trajectory. Okay, well, that is true to a point. You know, let's say you have a bow shooting 280 and then you go to a heavier arrow and you're shooting 265. You're going to have a bigger drop with that 265 arrow from 0 to 30 than you are with the 280 bow. From 30 to 40, there's going to be very little difference. And then from 40 to 60, you're going to start seeing that the 265 bow with the heavier arrow has retained its velocity. The lighter arrow that initially was traveling faster has shed velocity. And you're going to have an overall smaller pin gap, 0 to 60, 70, than you will with the faster initial bow and the lighter arrow. And that is the hardest thing I've seen people get their head around. But Cody saw it this year, because Cody has got that super long draw. He was shooting a 610 grain arrow, and he's super efficient bow at that long draw length. It's using a lot of great energy. And he was shooting flatter than the other guys with, arrows that were 50, 60 grains lighter.
That's incredible.
Yeah. It's the difference between throwing a ping pong ball and a golf ball. They're gonna be the same speed when they leave your hand. Ping pong ball is going to go 20 feet at the ground. The golf ball is going forever because it's retaining velocity based on its mass. So that's something you really ought to drill down on as far as some of the testing that you do, because I've seen some of the stuff you do, and it's great. You go into great detail, but you make it easy for people to understand. I think that would be a great test to show people.
Yeah, I just listening to you. How would I test that? Because if I feel like if I took 2 arrows and I dial out to 60, how big? I mean, I'll have to pick your brain on how to do that one, because that's a really interesting video. I'd really love to get out there, because that fast mate, I haven't even tested on that stuff, and I've always heard it. And so that'd be definitely an area for me to hit. So after the podcast, I'll probably be picking your brain on how to test that out.
That sounds good. Yeah,
on
absolutely.
camera. I do want to get into another thing here, and I'm probably going to get hammered for saying this, because I've contributed to this problem quite a bit. But I feel like we've made, I don't know how to put this. I feel like we've made the FOC the 6.5 Creedmoor of.
I knew you were going to say that 3-letter word
of the of the hunting industry, man. And I feel bad, because I get guys messaging me, and I was like, "Am I being ethical?" I'm like, is this what I've done? Is this me?
Yeah.
And there's me, Gritty, and Aaron, and a few other guys, all right about the same time. And I don't think it was planned or anything, obviously, but we all came out with episodes on FOC easily within a month of each other, I think, or arrow building. Yeah. And we're all talking about FOC, and it kind of just, I don't know, it kind of just got people overthinking it. So I've got tests that I've done, not on camera, and I've had tests where I've had a 5%. I built these arrows incredibly retarded. Like, I built a 5% FOC arrow, a 14% FOC arrow, and then like a 25% FOC arrow, and was just kind of seeing how they flew. Yep. What is your, and I haven't tested this, and this is a 2-part question, so I haven't tested this yet, but FOC doesn't always come with momentum, as you know. A lot of guys like to tie those two things together. I built all of these arrows at the same weights.
Yeah,
and I had
the only variable was FOC.
Yes, and
that's the only way you can do it.
Yes,
and be objective. Correct.
Yes, and so I never got the compound to shoot it in for penetration, but the arrow flight differences really weird when you got out to like 70, 80 yards. So here's my question. Is FOC having 3 arrows that weigh the identical, having a 5% FOC to a 24% FOC, what would be the difference at shooting those for penetration tests?
0.
Okay. The second part of that question is,
okay,
and because I had a feeling you're going to say that. Second part of the question is, I've heard of a podcast, and I forget what episode it was, but this guy had this product out where he placed some of the weight about 2 or 3 inches behind the insert internally in the arrow, and was getting increased penetration because he said that weight was farther behind the insert. And I'm like, well, how do you know it wasn't the momentum? So he said it was because it was the way the arrow was flexing and transferring the energy, which kind of makes sense to me, but good luck proving it unless you have those 2 arrows together. What is your perspective on that?
Oh, I can wrap all this crap up pretty easy.
Okay.
I don't really give a shit what your FOC is.
Okay.
When that arrow impacts the single most important thing, okay, whether it's my arrow or any arrow, whether it's an iron will, a Valkyrie, or a Thunderhead or a Muzzy, it doesn't matter. Throw all that crap out the window. What is most important is what setup that bow shoots the best, and what setup makes that arrow fly the best and the most true. Mm-hmm. The 99% factor for penetration is arrow flight. Okay? Mm-hmm. So it's not any of that other crap. It's arrow flight. If that arrow is not flying as perfect as it can be with the knot directly behind the head, mm-hmm. it's not going to penetrate the best. Okay? Mm-hmm. And the worse it flies, the worse it penetrates. So bows are just like rifles. Every bow likes different food. You can take 3 identical bows, identical draws, identical weights, and they're all 3 going to shoot a different arrow set up slightly. Just like you can buy 3 Remington 700s, mm-hmm. 270, identical matching serial numbers, and they're going to shoot 3 different loads. Period. That's just the way it is. So you can take the different FOCs and figure out which one shoots the best out of your bow and makes the arrow fly the best.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what's going to contribute to penetration. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all across the board. That's what I keep trying to tell guys. I'm not telling you not to shoot a bunch of weight up front. I'm just telling you that it's not a one-size-fits-all. But here's my experience with FOC. If you get your arrow flying perfect and high FOC is what gets you there, you will zip through everything you shoot, except for me, in my experience, not just with whitetails, elk, moose, caribou, Africa, Australia, wherever you want to call it, open terrain, dense terrain. My experience with FOC, the only negative was that if I ever experienced anything between me and the target, whether that be wind, a crosswind, an updraft, coming up a mountain,
mm-hmm.
if I deflected or hit a limb, something like that, that's where I saw failure. And the high FOC advocates will say, yes, but that's where we shine, because with a high FOC arrow, even if you get hit with a crosswind, the point's still going to hit on target.
But
they are
that tail,
100% correct. The point is still going to hit on target.
Yeah, but the tail won't be following it, right?
That's right. If that damn knock is 3 inches to the left or the right,
mm-hmm.
doesn't matter where it hits, it's not going in.
Makes sense.
So if you have perfect conditions and you don't have any variables, you've got a high FOC arrow that flies like a dart, it's going to zip through anything you see. But you could take the same arrow that's 15% FOC
mm-hmm.
and tune it perfectly. And if it's flying like a dart, it's going to zip right through too. Where the more balanced arrow, to me, this is just my opinion, has an advantage is when you introduce the variables of crosswinds or deflection. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So here's what I would say when you what'd you say your first one was? 4% or 5% FOC?
5%. Yeah.
Okay. So here's why I wouldn't think you want to do that,
mm-hmm.
because those arrows are pretty difficult to tune. You need a little point weight to tune them. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the more balanced the arrow is, the harder it is to tune. The more balanced the arrow is, the more it's going to show straightness, spine variance, poor release, fletching contact, yada, yada, yada. All that's going to amplify. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
As you go to the high FOC hides all of those flaws. Okay. Hides them in it because it recovers so much faster, because the ass end of the arrow is so light, the front's so heavy,
mm-hmm.
it recovers so much quicker.
Makes
If
sense.
there were no downsides to that with regards to crosswinds and things like that, I would tell everybody shoot high FOC, 100%. Then you got some trajectory issues,
mm-hmm.
but I just think that the moderately weighted FOC arrow is kind of that, again, most efficient setup. Like a 8 grain per pound arrow is a most efficient setup for a bow. Does that make sense?
It does, and I shoot around a 14% FOC right now, and I was blowing through shit at 70 yards with a 9% FOC, and it was like, man, what's the difference here? And my groups tightened up when I went to a 14% at longer ranges, but that's another one of these areas that guys have been pushing it way too far, and then now their ass ends getting blown around when they're getting, like you said, these crosswinds, and their knock's not following their broadhead. And it's like, man, like too much of anything is not good.
No.
I'm like,
well, here's the thing. This is when I understood that arrow flight was paramount for penetration. And I got very lucky to have a brain that only functioned at a high level when it was dealing with something with hunting. Anything else, my brain does not function. But when it comes to hunting, it works overtime. It's constantly, solving equations.
Mine's similar. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wish I could put this stuff to good use. But anyway, so when I was setting up to go on my second elk hunt after I understood what I needed for after my first one, and I was setting up my third elk hunt, my second one. Anyway, when I was setting up for an early elk hunt,
Mm-hmm.
I realized that I was going to have to change my ways from being one pin Bryan to multiple pin Bryan to elk hunt. I was going to have a 50-yard pin.
Mm-hmm.
And not for the initial shot, but for follow-up. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to have a 50 or 60-yard pin if I could do it. But back then our sights were so crappy. They had these big guards on them that you thought you had to have. And you couldn't go too low with your pins because you'd end up hitting your broadhead. Because back then we shot 1.5 inch wide broadheads. How about that? So anyway, so what I realized was when I was going to school, I was in college, and we had an archery range at the school in this huge pecan orchard, and they had hay bales, the big round bales to shoot. And so when I dropped back and started shooting my 40 and 50, I was losing my arrows in the hay bale, and I was having to get, like a machete out and like carve through the hay bales to dig my arrows out. But at 20 and 30 yards, they were still sticking out where I could pull them out. I'm going, this doesn't make sense because it's going so much slower out there.
Mm-hmm.
Then I realized that the farther away that arrow is from the bow, as long as it's not being disturbed with a variable, that it is spinning tighter. It's getting tighter and tighter and tighter, and it's flying more true, and the knock is as tight behind that head as it can get.
Mm-hmm.
And while it may be going, say, 15, 20% slower at those long ranges, it's flying perfect, and it blows through everything. And at a very early age, I realized that arrow flight is everything. And so then you go back and you start obsessing, okay, how do I get that same penetration at 20 now on that same bale? And that's when you go through the obsessive paper tuning, walk back tuning, planing, all of that different stuff. And that started, 25, 30 years ago for me. What's crazy is that 90% of our bow hunting community still, that light bulb has not gone off. There's only 10% of the archery community that understands that.
That makes sense. Well, I want to know from your perspective I failed to understand this, and I've looked into it. Why is KE touted way more than momentum out there? Where did that even come from?
From guns?
It came from guns?
Yeah.
Knockdown power and all that stuff.
That's it. Yeah. So let me tell you something. I grew up in Greenbow, Alabama, buddy. We grew up in the sticks, okay? And half the guys that used to come in the store thought KE meant knockout energy or knockdown energy.
Oh, really?
They didn't think it meant kinetic energy. They thought it was knockdown energy.
Okay.
And they'd flip that box of shells over and go, man, this one's got, 1,200 knockdown energy,
That's crazy. I never heard that.
Well, you're from, were you in Oregon or Washington?
Oregon. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you guys aren't too far behind us out there. I mean, but yeah, I mean, we're definitely cousins on opposite corners, but yeah, that's what everybody thought it came from. And of course, that just flowed right into the archery industry, and it's always been kinetic energy, and it has no place in archery. It's a formula. If you don't know how to calculate other things, it's a formula to give you an idea, what you're generating, but momentum is what you're looking for. We don't have shock power. We don't have impact power. If we did, we'd be shooting blunts.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I've got a question for you. Do you know what your momentum is on your setup?
I have no idea.
Okay, yeah, because I've dug into all this stuff.
I don't know what my FOC is either.
Oh, really? Well, I was talking to somebody about FOC the other day, and it was somebody that's like, man, am I ethical? I'm like, do you think Cameron Haynes worries about FOC? Because he's shooting FMJs. I'm like, if you shoot FMJs, you're probably not worried about FOC. If you're shooting a day 6 arrow, you're probably not worried about FOC, because if you were, you wouldn't be buying them because your GPI is too high to really get an effective, unless you wanted to shoot like a 700 grain arrow. I mean, what's your guys' GPI on those things? It's got to be over 11, 10.
Yeah, well, like a 300's 11 too.
Yeah. See, I mean, that, for guys that to me, it just seems like, okay, they're after momentum. They're after good arrow flight. They're not really, they really don't care about FOC and just,
No.
And I'm just trying to hammer. It sounds like I'm turning a 180 on stuff because I've shot, never shot over 15%, but a lot of these guys, they're getting, 20, 25% EFOCs or FOCs now. And it's like, no, now I'm like trying to be an advocate of like moderation. And,
well, let me say this. I don't want, you've heard me say, I think a few times here, that one size doesn't fit all, right?
mm-hmm.
I don't know how many trad guys you have that listen, but with regards to a trad guy,
Mm-hmm.
I'm more in the higher FOC camp. Okay. So, and the reason is for most, it's very difficult. Like most guys don't have Tom Clum 3 blocks from them to teach them how to shoot a trad bow. So you have to just learn, on the fly. You don't know that you're shooting maybe with improper form or a poor release, or you're torquing your string.
Mm-hmm.
Then you go through the whole process of tuning a trad bow. That's an act of Congress.
Yeah, I've seen my buddy do that. Yep.
Look, I've been a trad guy for 20-something years. I mean, it's hard, and there's so much voodoo in them damn things. you can't once one rule doesn't apply to all of them. So anyway, where a higher FOC is beneficial in the trad world is, number one, you've got all these flaws that you're trying to mask. Okay. You're shooting off a wooden shelf. You have a poor release. You may be underspined, overspined. The brace height the string may have stretched. The brace height may be too short. I mean, there's all of these different variables. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you may short draw, you may long draw. I mean, there's too many to count with a trad bow. So a higher FOC bow arrow will recover faster. Okay. It's going to hide and mask and compensate for all these flaws. Even if it's an improperly spined arrow, it will correct itself a little bit faster. The second thing is that a trad guy is not shooting over 30 yards.
Mm-hmm.
There's a handful out there that do, but 99% really don't shoot much over 20 or 25. So now you're back into, okay, these outside variables, debris, limbs, whatever, crosswinds, you're limiting that exposure because you're limiting your range. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So you take myself, for example, or like, well, I don't want to compare myself to Aaron, but Snyder. Aaron's one of the best trad shots I've ever seen.
Really?
And he's only been doing it 2 years. It totally pisses me off. So, but he shoots 300 or 400 arrows a day.
Mm-hmm.
He considers that part of his job, and he shoots every day. Normal humans can't do that. So, but you take a guy like him that has the knowledge and the time to obsessively set up his trad bow and tune it perfectly. Well, he doesn't really have to mask or hide poor form, poor release, improperly spined arrow, because he can go through that process and perfect it over time. I've done it long enough that it doesn't take me that long anymore to tune a trad bow. And so I have a little bit of advantage over most, and so does Aaron. So we can shoot a heavier arrow with lower FOC and get it to fly correctly. But the lion's share of your trad guys don't have either the time or the experience to go through that process. So the high FOC may be right for them. So I'm not a one-size-fits-all high FOC sucks. Mm-hmm. It's just not the end-all be-all that it's portrayed to be by the FOC camp. Does that make sense?
It does. And to expand on that, in my opinion, it's whatever you're confident in and works. I mean, obviously, if you have confidence in, like, I have a 14% FOC, and for me, that's perfect. And I hunt everything. I mean, I've passed through the wildebeest this year. I passed through the bull like it was butter. I mean,
yep.
it just, and that works for me. And I after listening to your efficiency thing there, I might bump up my weight. I'm about 100 grains short of where you would like to have my setup be. And so there's room for me to improve there, and but 400, I shoot 457 grains, 28 inches at 282, and I always try and keep my arrow between 280 and 290, just for tuning. I like that. Another big reason is for trajectory. I've shot that for so many years. If I have to hold over or compensate, I know exactly where to put that pin if I don't have time to dial, or something funky happens, and I know exactly where that arrow is going to be. I don't have to. I can shoot my 3-pin all the way out to 65 yards without any worries, without adjusting. I mean, no problem.
That's exactly what I was saying earlier.
Yep.
Is I've always shot 265 out of a compound.
Okay.
I've always shot a heavier arrow, but I've always been in that 265 range, and that's where I like to be. I feel like that's the most efficient middle ground for me. I understand that arrow trajectory, and so I know what the holdovers are. I'm never adjusting a sight. It just it doesn't happen. I mean, I know where my 35 ring is around me, and if I can't judge 25 and in, I need to take up golf. I mean, if you can't judge 25 yards, if you can't judge for the animals inside of 25 yards or past it, I mean, you need to practice judging yardage. But understanding that arrow flight, knowing that at 35 I'm 6 or 7 low, and at 10 I'm 4 high, it's super easy. So, and you take your brain out of the equation, understanding your arrow flight. Now you're not. Let me tell you this: I've seen so many animals get away while guys are dicking with their rangefinder. That rangefinder has been the best and worst thing that's ever happened to bow hunters, because people become so dependent on them. Instead of learning how to judge yardage, they're constantly trying to get that one last range, and they're blowing their deal.
That's me. that's me in a nutshell. Yeah, I always tell people my mental rangefinder is broken.
Yeah, well, the thing is I mean, if you learn to judge yardage 40 and in, and you're very proficient at it, nothing gets away from you. To me, a rangefinder is for 40 and beyond. There's no reason to even use it any closer.
Yeah. So, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's it. No, that was it.
I was gonna say that it's kind of funny. One of the only bow shoots I've ever won, it was actually unmarked.
There you go.
And I had Anthony, who I think he was, Anthony, who was carrying around a trad bow that day. He was just like, every time I shot, he'd be like, "You need to do this. Like, you're adding 5 yards to each target." He's like, and so I would just like tell myself 30 yards, and I'd go with 30 yards, even though I felt like it was 35, and it worked really well. Like his rangefinder, mental rangefinder, was like was dead on, being a trad guy.
Well, it's also like, for me, it's not as much a trad guy as an old guy. So, my first 15 years of bow hunting, they weren't even around.
Oh,
so,
really?
Yeah. My first year, I'll just tell you, my first year elk hunting out west, I missed 3 bulls in 7 days. And I shot under every one of them because, I'm coming from the south, super dense forest, small animals. I'm out in the open, meadows, and the open timber in New Mexico. And there's a, 600-700 pound bull standing out there at, 50. And I'm going, "Oh, well, he's 30. I was misjudging by 20 yards.
Holy smoke. Yeah, I do that same thing.
It was pitiful. I mean, they looked like they were in my lap because of the size of the animal in the open range. So, that next year, listen, I'm sure I'll get all kinds of hate over this, but, I was chasing around cattle like moo cows in my uncle's pasture, at 40 and 50 yards, shooting them with blunts in the butt, trying to make sure I learned how to judge yardage in open pasture on the same size animal. I was obsessive. I wasn't going to screw up again. We didn't have a rangefinder to go by. You had to figure it out. Until I got in trouble.
That's funny you say that. My first year hunting, I think I missed 6 or 7 blacktail, and didn't have a rangefinder at that time. And my horizontal was always great. They were always right behind the shoulder, but I was always way low or way high. And I was like, man, I just suck. And so the first animal I killed, I think I was like halfway through the season and I had so many opportunities. I was like, okay, I'm going to get a rangefinder. Got one. Next animal I shot at, I ranged and I killed. And it was like, it's just, and so since then, I've just relied on my rangefinder so heavily. I didn't range the bull this year because he was only at 17. But I'm like you, man. Like I'd go to a bow shoot, have like a target at like 30, 35 yards. That would be like on the other side of this creek. That's like other side of the hill. And those are the ones that I'd mess up on. Like I'd shoot that for 50, like, I was winning until that target.
Yeah. Well, judging yardage is such a critical part of being a very efficient bow hunter that capitalizes on opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I try to do. I try to take all the variables out of the equation. I don't like moving parts. You may freak you out if it's to lose all credibility with you. You ready?
Sure.
I still shoot a whisker biscuit on my bow.
I've got one on my bow.
No, you do not.
I swear to God, my budget bow. I got one on there.
Your budget bow. Well, this is my primo bow. Well, I don't like moving parts. I don't want any variables. I don't want a stick getting stuck under that thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want a spring. I don't want a hinge. I don't want a string.
Yep.
I don't want anything. I want it. Keep it simple, stupid, bulletproof. That's why I'm a one-pin guy unless I'm Western hunting.
Uh-huh.
And then I have an adjustable sight. But if I have an adjustable sight, it's basically, if I go, like when I went antelope hunting this year, I had it basically the same exact setup to where I had it topped out at 25. Like if I rolled it all the way to the top, that was 25. I didn't go any lower than that. That's where I started.
Huh.
And then if I knew if it was closer, which I knew it wouldn't be, I could just hold low. But, most of the time, I literally just kept that thing on 40. And I'm going to tell you, if there was an antelope at 45, I wouldn't have adjusted the sight.
Mm-hmm.
I know the trajectory of my arrow, and I would have just held over.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyway, that's just the way I am. I like it to be no thinking, no anything, second nature. What I call it the wire. If I'm tree stand hunting, I know my wire. I've established that wire. This is 30, this is 30, this is 30. Once they're in the wire, there's no thinking, there's no adjusting, there's no anything. They just die. So
I like that.
And to me, that's just a way to eliminate variables, because variables are they are the function of failure.
That's something that I preach on in a little bit different verbiage, but it's like, man, let's get rid of all those errors in the off season so we don't have them, during season when it actually counts, when it actually matters. Like, let's figure out where we're going wrong here and just shoot. That's just part of shooting every day, knowing your stuff, getting more experience, and just, I've had stuff where what made me get into bows so heavily was a moving D loop. And I didn't know that was a thing. And my serving, basically, you know how it is. If you crimp a D loop on too hard, it just pushes right through the servings, and then
it starts to slide on you.
Yeah, well, I was about 1 out of every 15 shots, I'd get a 2-foot high arrow, and then so I went hunting with it. Won't happen probably on an elk. Well, I sailed to one of the prettiest bulls I've ever seen in my life. It was only about a 280-inch bull, but it was a 5-point, so it was a stud, and sent it right over his back at 60 yards, and I don't think I've ever held so steady on an animal. It was like I was so pissed, and I'm like, went back to camp, and then I moved my D loop. I'm like, that's what it was? Are you kidding me? Like, I didn't even know how to tie a D loop at that time, and so that's what made me get in this tear of like, never again. Like,
eliminate variables.
Yep, not going to happen. And so I totally understand that, and I know guys that carry whisker biscuits in their pack when they go in the backcountry. I carry extras of everything, and whisker biscuits are Old Faithful. And I don't know where this thought came from that you can't shoot whisker biscuits accurately at longer ranges. I don't know if you've heard that, but I don't shoot long ranges with a compound, so it's a moot point for me.
See, I've shot them. I can group out to 60 in a paper plate. That's and I hate even using the word paper plate, but anyway, it's 60. That's a reference for what my group is like. And I don't shoot past that. And I'm telling you this, I don't like a 60-yard initial shot. I have that there
Mm-hmm.
because I'm a firm believer in big game, especially elk and moose and larger animals.
Mm-hmm.
If they are in an effective range, you need to be putting a second, third arrow in them.
Same here.
I remember shooting a moose in Canada with my recurve, and I shot him at 15, 30, and 45. The 45 was not a good shot. I hit him in his private parts, but I put 3 arrows in that moose from the time I shot him initially till he got to the tree line where I couldn't shoot anymore. And he made it 10 yards from the tree line, but he had 3 arrows in him.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm a firm believer in that. I mean, especially if you're unsure of your initial shot,
Mm-hmm.
that is, I'm a firm believer in getting arrows in them. And some people are not. They think that you're going to push them and move them even further. But if you've watched enough animals go down,
Mm-hmm.
you can pretty much tell from the initial reaction if it's a fatal shot, because usually they're not going to go very far at all, very rarely even out of sight. So anyway, that is what that follow-up long shot is for, and that's the only thing I really use it for. But again, there's guys like, say, Aaron Snyder, for instance. And the only reason I use him is I've only seen him and like Levi Morgan up close and personal and like watched them shoot.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like, you don't even believe it's real.
Hmm.
When you're watching guys like those two shoot at like 110, 120 yards. And I mean, it's incredible. And those guys have the ability to have to me, a very effective initial first 60-yard shot.
Mm-hmm.
As long as it's a relaxed, larger animal in my mind.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is also where you grow up, too. A guy's over here, 60 yards. I mean, God, I think everybody's killed something at 60 yards here.
Well, let me say that we're out west,
Mm-hmm.
everybody has a 60-yard pin.
Yeah.
But not everybody should have a 60-yard pin. I've watched them shoot.
Oh, I totally agree with that.
I've been to archery ranges with Aaron in Colorado and Denver.
Uh-huh.
And we were there like back in August, and these guys pulled up, and I mean, they had the finest bows you've ever seen. And they literally were bouncing arrows to the 30.
Oh, geez.
And yeah. And they're making adjustments on their sight. And I'm going, guys, if you're bouncing at 10 feet in front of the target,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to adjust that out with your sight.
Right.
But, of course, you go over and look, and they've got, a sight tape out to 80 yards on there. I'm going,
Yep.
Really?
Yep. I see that. When I go to the range, I see that quite often. I'm out, and I don't offer help until they ask for it. And, and usually it's just something silly, a silly adjustment with their rest or something, or their cams are out of sync or something. But it just, I mean, I took a shot this year. I haven't talked about this too much. I took a shot this year on an animal that I shouldn't have. Straight up, I shouldn't have. Even if I would have killed it, I shouldn't have. And I was just thinking, I'm like, after that, I'm like, man, I was just thinking some of the best shots taken were probably never made, or probably some of the best shots made were never taken. And I'm like, that's what I'm going to tell myself, because I shot that animal. He jumped the string. It was 72 yards. And the guide said, go for it. He's just going to stand there and watch you smack him. And I hit him right where the tail comes out. And
because he moved.
He jumped. When my arrow was about 20 yards, he just took off. And I just barely caught him. And I'm like, man, even if the animal stood there and did take that arrow, it was too windy to be shooting. And I'm like, I just shouldn't have took that shot. I mean, just because I had permission to do it, my guide told me, this animal, they don't jump the string. All right, cool. Let's smoke it. And it was pretty windy. And I just kind of come back around to that. I had like a 16-hour plane ride home, a $1,500 bill with nothing to show for it. And it was like, some of the best shots made were probably never taken. And, they were just let down. And, that was the best decision. And I just kind of going off of what you said, just because you have an 80-yard pin doesn't mean you should always use it. And, I've shot a handful of animals at 70 to 75, never lost one. That was the first animal I'd ever, and he's probably running around, not even worried about me now. I guarantee, unless he died of some weird cause, it wasn't from that arrow.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that once you get over a certain range,
mm-hmm.
you have to rely on luck. You can make the perfect shot, but you've got to rely on luck that animal does not move, twist, turn, drop.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a chance that I'm willing to take. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I have taken, I guess, probably 3 shots too far. Well, I'd say 4 shots too far. I took one too far this year, but I've taken 4 shots too far, and I've lost one of them. And, there's too great a variable. I always come back to variables. There's too many things that can happen between the time you release and the time that arrow gets to its target. If it's a live animal, the target can move.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't think it's fair. And so, there's always going to be another chance, and there's going to be an opportunity to get closer. And so I used to argue with Aaron about this all the time. And it was, because he's one of the most amazing shots I've ever seen with a compound and now with a trad bow. But
mm-hmm.
We used to argue this all the time. And now that he's hunting with a trad bow, he says publicly, look, I took a lot of far shots I probably shouldn't have, but I used my shooting as a crutch.
Mm-hmm.
Now, having to hunt with a trad bow and having to get in danger close, I realized that I could have got closer on 90% of those animals. I didn't have to shoot that far.
Mm-hmm.
And then he got a very good look at my training ground versus his training ground. We were sitting in a tree stand his first year he ever came to Alabama, and there was a buck that came out, and the buck was, I can't remember if he was 55 or 60, but the buck was in a field feeding,
mm-hmm.
and he said, I'm going to shoot at this deer. And I said, go ahead. It won't matter. He goes, what do you mean it won't matter? And I said, he won't be there when the arrow gets there. And Aaron tells the story all the time. He shot at that deer. This deer was feeding in a green field. The deer literally dropped, turned, blew, and was to the tree line when his arrow got there, 6-7 feet away. And he looked at me and he said, I get it. So,
I get it.
Yeah. That's what we grew up hunting. They're like the Matrix.
That's funny. I've got a video actually listening to you talk about that. Maybe I'll upload and I'll tag it. I'll tag you in it. It's my favorite video of me hunting with my dad. He swings and misses on this blacktail, and it's got him square pegged. It's probably only 40, 50 yards, and it's got him pegged, and it's just a young buck. And we rattled him in, and so I think the buck's actually looking for me, but I think he might have had my dad pegged. Anyways, my dad shoots, and that buck, as soon as he hears that bow goes off, he churns and runs. And it's in slow. I got it in slow mo, so you can see how far that arrow is above that deer. He would have missed even if the deer would have stood there, about a foot over his back. But that deer was already about 4 or 5 steps facing the other direction.
Yep,
gone by the time that arrow got there, and it was like not even close.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, you compare a blacktail to a southern whitetail,
mm-hmm.
and they're like slow motion.
Oh, really?
Oh my gosh! Yeah, the first time Brian Call came down there, he and Aaron came down and hunted one week, and so you met Wes that works with Born and Raised.
Oh yeah, mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Wes came down and he was going to film for Brian and Aaron. So he came down to film, and I can't remember how many deer those guys shot that week, but I want to say, I may be wrong on this, but I think only one was not a spine.
Really?
Yeah. And I kept telling them, guys, you have to, if you're going to shoot them at 30, which 30 just seems very close to you, right?
Yeah.
I'd say if you're going to shoot them at 30, you need to aim off the deer. Put your 30 like an inch or two below their heart, below their chest.
Really?
They're like, aim off the deer. I'm like, yeah, aim completely off the deer. And they couldn't bring themselves to do it. And it was just, spine. And they were like, I just can't believe this stuff. They're amazing. They're absolutely amazing. So it's almost like shooting a shotgun. You almost have to lead them to where they're going,
Well,
So,
how often do you aim below the deer, then you shoot under it? I mean, is it really? That's
Never.
interesting. Yeah, that's definitely not a blacktail.
You're not going to aim off of a deer at 15 yards. Don't get me wrong. You're not doing that. I'm just, as the range increases, you know, you're basically lowering what you're, you know, if you're sighted in at 30 and that deer's at 30, you know, you're right there on their brisket.
Maybe I should take that advice, because I'm going to Texas for the first time for whitetail, and I wonder if those are.
Yeah, they're pretty jukey too. Not like ours, but they got some moves.
Maybe aim for the heart then instead of.
Always heart shots.
Interesting.
Always heart shots. Yeah, for sure. The only time I ever aim for, like, say, mid-body lung on an animal is when, number one, it's a larger animal, and number two, if I'm unsure of the range, but I know it's not closer than this. Does that make sense? So let's say that I look at an elk and he's standing out there broadside. I don't have time to range him, but I know he's at least 40, at least, and I know he's not closer than that. Okay, so at that point, I've got my 40 high lung. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So
if he's past that, you're always going to be dropping into that heart zone and into those vital zones. You know, if let's say that I wasn't sure for sure that he wasn't closer than 40, well, then you have to heart shot him at 40, because if he could possibly be closer, then you're going to be high. So if you aim to mid-body high and you're unsure how close he is, you're going to hit high in that no man's land between the spine and the lungs, and you're not going to have a mortal wound. So it's always better to, let me see if I get this right. It's always better to underjudge. So it's always better to say, okay, I'm 90% sure he's 40, but he may be 35. I put my 35 high lung. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm glad you're telling me this, because I was just going to plan on shooting him Oregon style, right where you want to hit. So,
well, you can't do that if you don't know exactly what the yardage is.
That's true. That's true.
Yep. And if you put that damn rangefinder down, you wouldn't alert them, and then they wouldn't jump your string.
Yeah. There's something to be said about that. I've been using that as a crutch, and I'm not going to compare myself to Aaron as far as an archer goes, but I definitely use my marksmanship as a crutch as well. He's probably to a more extreme extent, but there's a lot to be said about that. I mean,
all right. So let's say this. Let's say that you have you guys are Western guys. Y'all take longer shots. Okay. All right, so let's say that you come in, you're ranging a bull. He comes in, he turns and he starts paralleling you at 40, okay? And you've hit him at 40, and you know he's paralleling you at 40, so he's going to be within 40 to 42 yards because he's paralleling you. So you take your rangefinder, you put it down, you get on your string, on your release, whatever you're doing, and you go ahead and draw. All right. So you draw, and that bull sees you. Trots at an angle away. He trots away and stops in a perfect opening, but he's trotted. You don't know whether he's trotted 10, 15, or 20 yards. What are you going to do? Are you going to let down and grab your rangefinder again?
I'd shoot it.
Yeah, but that's what you've got to be able to do. But you've got to be able to say, okay, well, I know for a fact he was 40.
Yep.
I don't think he's traveled more than 10. So I know for a fact that he's somewhere between 40 and 50. I'm going to put 40 high lung because I know I'm above vitals, and it's going to drop in there, or I'm going to miss him low and not wound him. That's
probably exactly what I would do. It's just aim a little high with my 40 or aim for the heart with my 50.
That's right.
Something like that. That's probably what I'd do.
Yep. But it's always better to calculate for the drop. You don't ever want to undercalculate and hold what you think is a long-range low. That's a recipe for failure. If you just do one calculation and always, figure your math high down, you're not thinking of two equations. Should I hold high? Should I hold low? Is he this? Is he that? Always hold drop low. And now you've eliminated one other whole factor of your brain trying to compute.
Makes sense. That makes really good sense, actually. That's a good tip.
Yeah.
So, well, I want to get into one more thing here, Brian, before we wrap this up. If you got a few more minutes on you,
I'm good.
So with your arrows, they are higher cost. About what, $200 a dozen, somewhere around there.
Yeah, the shafts are 170 and the fletched arrows are crap. Are they 190? I think they're 190.
Yeah. Well, that's because you're going through a lot of arrows to find the ones that you're actually coming out with, right? I mean,
I've got a couple of things working against me, but I got to say though, I've looked at a lot of the stuff that's out there. I don't know that we're that much higher once you get into that type of tolerance arrow. I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, with the grizzly sticks and all those things out there, and I've never shot the grizzly sticks, but I think you're playing in those guys' price range, I believe.
Yeah, probably so.
Yeah.
I can't remember what some of the platinums and the things like that cost, but anyway, here's the thing. This is the honest truth. We're small potatoes, okay? We're not buying, 2 million shafts a year. So, we can't go buy arrows like the big boys can. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. Like a quantity discount kind of thing.
Yeah. It's a volume thing. And then the other side of the coin is that, we're asking them to build these arrows unlike the way they're building anything else in their factory. Okay. So I'm not gonna say that you may have the same arrow built that's got 4 different companies' logos on it, but it's the same arrow out of the same factory. I'm not going to say that happens, but it very possibly could. So we're asking them to build something that they don't have anything else to do with it. So if it doesn't meet spec, it doesn't go into our lesser quality coal pile. It goes into a recycle bin. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because that's where I was leading with that. Is why don't you guys have a lesser quality arrow? Is it because you just want to keep the high quality out there?
I'll be totally honest with you. I built this arrow for me. This is the arrow I wanted. I didn't want anything else. And I thought, I'm only going to build this arrow the way I want it. And if there's people that want the same arrow, that's what I'm going to provide them. And I catch enough grief from our customers that have all the fine, meticulous tools and setups. I catch enough grief from those guys about tolerances. And, listen, I love it. Let me tell you this. This is the God's honest truth. Those guys like you that have all the stuff and are meticulously building their setups, that is the greatest QC I can have, and it's the greatest form of feedback I can have. So let's say that every 10 customers is a Garrett that has everything. Well, now I've got a guy calling me going, hey, man, 2 of these arrows are not quite like this. They're like that. I'm like, okay, let me check that. For every one of the guys like you that have the ability to go through and check everything to a meticulous level, I'm getting feedback from guys like you, every 10th customer that says, hey, you might want to check this. You might want to look at that. What about this? Sometimes it's valid. Sometimes it's not. And I have to explain it. But it's a great way for me to get good feedback and good constructive criticism. I want it. I welcome it. I love it. Okay. So, but I don't want to go through that at the lower level. I don't want to go through that to where I'm getting say not a perfect product, a slightly inferior product, and then have to go through that same scrutiny on those. Well, I don't think these are meeting this. I don't think this is quite right. I don't want to go through that. I just want to produce one arrow that I think is the single best hunting arrow you can buy. And that's what we're going to produce. And, we're working on a broadhead right now. We're working diligently to get this thing, available by May or June. So people can, try it and use it for this next season. And it's the same thing. I want to build what I feel is the perfect head for compound shooters and the perfect head for a trad shooter based on what I want. And if it's what other guys want, then great, we'll sell a bunch of them. If it's not, then I'll just have a bunch of broadheads. But that's the way I kind of am approaching all this stuff. Is I just know what I want, and that's the way I'm going to build it. I'm going to build it one way, and hopefully people like it. So far, people have really liked the arrows.
Well, I appreciate where you're coming from in the mindset and all the work that it basically took to get these arrows out there, because it sounds like you and I are like brain twins, man. Just listening to you, I love it. So I'll have to get some arrows and test them out and shoot them and stuff, and then I'm really looking forward to testing the momentum at longer ranges, kind of speed reduction or the velocity shedding thing. There's a term that you use for it.
Yeah, shed velocity. I mean, I think you'd be the right person to do it, and I think you'd be very objective. What I've noticed over the years is the guys that have done the testing, they have a dog in the fight. There's an axe to grind. That's why I haven't got online and done some of these things. Like Aaron's been telling me, man, let's order some ballistic gel and do this and do that. I'm like, I don't want to be the one to do that, because I don't think it's going to come across as from an objective place. I want somebody that's the net neutral. I want a archery Switzerland guy to do it.
Right.
That's doesn't have a dog in the fight or a pig in the farm. They're just want to see what the real results are, not trying to sell anything. And that's why I feel like guys like you are so valuable to the archery community, because it's unbiased. And that's what I want people to, maybe if they get anything out of this conversation, is if you're going to listen to guys, man, listen to guys that are unbiased and they're just trying to build the best setup for themselves, not trying to sell something.
Well, I appreciate that, man. And I've tried, I don't know if you heard or if you listened to the podcast, we did one the other day about bows, and I just got a kick out of it. Just Austin was like, we ain't sponsored by anybody, as he's
That's
like.
That's the way to be.
Yeah. And
why do you think that people listen to what Aaron Snyder says?
Exactly.
His only sponsor he wants in life is Copenhagen. He doesn't want anybody else. That's it.
Right.
I mean, because he wants to shoot what he wants, not what somebody else wants him to shoot. And of course, he has no concept of the value of money. So there's those two things.
Well, I really appreciate your time, Brian. And is there any clothing thoughts that you want to, or any links to anything that you want to send people to?
No, you can just follow us on Instagram, Day 6 Gear. Aaron helps me with that, and he always posts great things and cool stuff. And I'm terrible at it, and I've got to up my Instagram game, or I'll never be Insta famous. But,
it is. I'll tell you, it is important. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to having a good presence and communicating with people on there.
Or you could just have a guy like Aaron do it for you.
Yeah, or if he's doing that for people, send him my way too.
No, you couldn't afford him. Let me tell you.
Oh, I imagine.
I have to pay him in arrows, and he goes through more arrows than any human alive. I've never seen anybody shoot as much as this guy shoots. But anyway,
that's fine.
No, our Instagram page is great, and he puts videos up all the time. How things go together. If we get a lot of questions from customers about, like 10 questions that are the same about how do these things go together, I'll say, hey man, these people are trying to figure this out. He'll hop on there and show how it goes together. So it's great having somebody like him that can do it so quickly. Man, it would take me 20 minutes to figure out how to post the video on there. I'm just not that technical when it comes to the social media stuff, but our website's pretty easy to follow. It's pretty easy to order from. We've made it pretty simple to where you don't have to order our arrows and then take them to an archery shop. We'll cut them and install it and spin test them and get them ready to go. And I guess the only other thing I would say is that if you buy arrows from us and something's not right, I will make it right immediately, if not faster. I am 100% customer service. It's not about the money. It's about making sure guys are happy. If you're not happy, I don't want the money, and I don't want you to have something you don't want. but I just want the opportunity to make it right before you start pouncing on the internet. That's
Right.
the only thing that drives me nuts.
Well, I appreciate that, and I wish more companies had that mindset. It once seems like with some of them, especially doing reviews for quite a few products and just shooting a lot of. Once something goes south, you really find out which ones are the ones you want to work with. So
You bet. But I've enjoyed it, buddy.
Well, I appreciate you coming on to the podcast for it's almost been 2 hours already, man. So I'll let you get going,
kidding.
and we'll have to get you back on maybe when you come out with your broadhead, and you can go over that with me and see what you got. So,
well, I'll send you some. I know you YouTube guys like to shoot blocks and steel and plywood and shit, so I'll let y'all go tear them up.
Well, I appreciate that, man. Well, you have a great night, and I'll catch you here soon, I'm sure.
Sounds great.
See ya.
Yeah.
Well, that's this episode of the podcast. Thanks, Bryan, for coming onto the show. You're an awesome guest with a lot of information, and with your hunting background and what you've done so far, I really value your opinion, and it was great to hear some things that I never thought about, and some things that I've always had that I've preached on based off of my experiences. But to hear those things kind of validated through your experiences really makes me feel like I'm on the right track. So hopefully you guys got a lot out of this episode. I know some of the stuff prior in the beginning was a little dry with the arrow manufacturing, but I was really feeling my own need to know that. I've always been curious about materials and sourcing and stuff. But when you get farther towards the middle, and I just felt like there's a lot of really good information. And what Bryan and I discussed off the podcast, I am super freaking excited about what he has coming out later this year. Super excited. I'm not just hyping it out. I'm legitimately excited to try some of the stuff he's got coming. It doesn't matter whether you're a heavy arrow guy, light arrow guy. The shit he has coming out, if I was going to design it, it would be pretty much exactly what he's coming out with. So really excited for that. If you guys want to check him out, I'll have links to his Instagrams, websites down below in the description box. But be sure to check him out. He's a great guy, comes out with a great product. He's all about customer service. And I think we're going to have him again on the show for sure. So as always, guys, I appreciate you for listening. And if you are listening to the outro, you're probably one of the more diehard listeners. I don't know how many people actually listen to the outros, but if you've made it this far, you're probably one of the more committed listeners. And if you really like the podcast, be sure to go on to patreon.com/onpointpodcast. If you want to monetarily support the podcast over and above leaving a review or buying a hat, this is the best way to do it. So as always, guys, appreciate you, and I'll see you tomorrow.